Hi, I'm Todd Austin from University of Michigan and Attad Labs, which is a startup that is commercializing a derivative of the Morpheus technology. I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to tell you about Morpheus II, which is a second generation secure CPU designed to protect vulnerable software and hardware from security attacks. I'm going to talk about our journey on building this CPU, and then the security and performance analysis of it as well. And this is joint work with my colleagues at University of Michigan and University of Texas. So let's start off by just assessing the state of today's security defenses. And as you could tell from my slide, they're not too good. There's a lot of things we need to worry about. And if you watch the news, you see there's just loads and loads of really high profile vulnerabilities being exploited out there. When we live in today's computing world, we extend a significant amount of trust to software, and software gets penetrated all the time. One of the most successful software penetrations in the last few years was the Equifax data breach in 2017. During that data breach, half of all Americans' financial credentials were stolen. Half of you watching this talk right now have lost your social security number, your address, and your name to these attackers, still yet to be found. And it's not just the software we have to trust. We got to trust the people that make and use the software as well. Famously, Cambridge Analytica abused the interfaces of Facebook to steal information about Facebook users. So when we use systems, we have to extend a lot of trust to software and the people that use and build that software. And why is this trust often violated? Why do we end up seeing all these data breaches and hacks and various other things? In my mind, there's really only two significant reasons why we see the state of security being as bad as it is today. The first is the existence of software. Now, I used to say that it was the existence of buggy software, but it's really the existence of software itself that it leads to these problems. Software of any kind is eventually hackable. We don't know as a species how to make software that cannot be ever hacked. It's just too complex, too vulnerable. You can invent vulnerabilities in the future. It's just really difficult to stop hacking. Also, software comes at the people that need to protect it very quickly. This graph we see right here is the number of lines of code over time that are executing on a commercial airline when it takes off. Starting, the blue line is for Boeing, the red line is for Airbus. And you'll see that today, when these commercial airlines take off, they have tens of millions of lines of code running on them, and it's increasing all the time. So even if we had mechanisms to formally verify the software, we wouldn't be able to keep up with the rate at which it's coming. And programmers are making the bugs that are being exploited in these systems. So software is a big problem. The second problem is, even if our software was correct and sound, systems leak tons of information through what are called side channels. A side channel is where an observable property of a system, like the noise made from a safe dial, can be observed by, say, a stethoscope to open the safe. Same thing on a computer system. We can observe control latency in the software. We can observe how memory is accessed, the timing of individual operations. We can observe how caches are manipulated. We can observe how speculation occurs or does not occur. And this leaks tons of information that can be scooped up by attackers in a way that's really hard to detect. And to make matters even more worse, performance-centric design and side channel resistant design often are at odds with each other. For example, in performance-centric design, we want to make the common case the fastest. In side channel resistant design, we want to make the common case look like every other case. So it's a big challenge to try and eliminate side channels. If we can solve these two problems, if we can address these two problems of software and side channels, we can build a much more resistant, system that's resistant to attacks. So how are we doing in terms of defenses today? Well, we're doing good on some fronts, okay? Here's what we do well. One, we're good at fixing and finding vulnerabilities. We've got tools like Valgrind and Coverity that can analyze our software and find these vulnerabilities and get them fixed as quickly as possible. The challenge is you've got to fix them all. Otherwise, you're still vulnerable. And if the attacker finds one that you didn't find, then they're in. So that's a big challenge. The closure on that is really a big challenge. Other things we do really well are in hardware and system software, really sort of locking down and stopping a very well-known attack. So for example, ARM's trust zone is very good at stopping memory-based attacks. Intel's control flow enforcement is very good at stopping control flow-based attacks. Once we understand attack well, we can lock that attack down with special system support. The challenge, though, is how do we stop the attacks that we don't know about that get invented after our systems go into the field? The idea of stopping emergent attacks isn't even really on the plate of the security designers today. And this is really where we need to do a lot better. Just when I originally made this talk, there were 4 high-profile emergent attacks that emerged in that 1 week. And all the systems were vulnerable to them. We need to build security that can stop attacks that are invented in the future. That's a really tall task, but one we have to achieve to build highly secure systems. And we call this idea of building systems that stop attacks, even if they're invented in the future. I call this durable defenses. A defense that's durable is one that, you don't get a call at 7 p.m. at night and stay up all night trying to fix the bug. That's not durability. Durability is like RSA 1024-bit versus 2048-bit. We knew that 1024 bits was going to be not enough bits years in advance. That's a durable defense. So can we build hardware security defenses that are durable and are really, really difficult to hack? And I'd say the signs point to yes. One of the clear signs was the DARPA SITH program, which Morpheus came out of, which really focused on building durable defenses for protecting software. And Morpheus really came to light as a technique that was very powerful for protecting software. I'm going to tell you all about it right now. So what Morpheus does is very unique. And I'll just say it's inspired by the human immune system. I'm not going to go into that detail right now, but if you want to learn more about it, you can go to my webpage and find out about that. It is focused on emergent attacks it's never seen before that it wants to stop once it's encountered. Now, this equation, it's kind of a qualitative equation. It's not a real equation, but it kind of sums up what it means to create an exploit to hack a system. An attacker needs vulnerabilities, some kind of bug or aspect of the system that wasn't anticipated in its secure design that allows you to sort of get into the system. And the attacker needs to manipulate implementation assets, things like pointers and stacks and stuff like that, instructions, etc. It's the combination of getting into the system through vulnerabilities and manipulating the internals of the system, which ultimately creates an exploit. And an exploit is simply a sequence of vulnerability and implementation asset manipulation that leads to going around the security of a system. Now, the whole world, everybody is focused on vulnerabilities. How do we find and fix vulnerabilities? How do we find and fix vulnerabilities? And my argument is you're not going to find and fix all vulnerabilities. It's a rat race. It's a hamster wheel. You'll always be on. So what Morpheus does is it focuses on implementation assets and it tries to obscure them and make them difficult to understand. So once the attacker does get in, they don't know what they're looking at. So here's how Morpheus works. Morpheus has a bunch of attack detectors inside of it. These are things that look for things that look a little bit suspicious. And they're based on vulnerabilities. Did a buffer overflow? Was there arithmetic on a code pointer? Did someone do a logical operation on a pointer? These are things you should never see. They can be done, but you never ever see this stuff in normal program. So there's lots of indications that there's an attack going on. Now, do we kill a program when an attack goes on? No. That will be, that's the false positives will get you there. What we do is we randomize the state of the program. And our defenses are completely based on randomization with churn. And what churn means is to re-randomize while the program is running. And specifically in Morpheus 2, what we randomize is code representation. How do you represent the instructions? We randomize the layout of the address space for code. We randomize what a code pointer representation is. these are the pointers that point to code objects, what a function pointer representation is, and what a return pointer representation is, which are all code pointers. And specifically, the entropy, that is the key size that defines what those representations are, is 504 bits. And as we detect activity that's strange, or about every 50 milliseconds, we're going to churn that representation. We're going to change that representation while the system is alive. So just to give you a sense of this, I want to play this video that was made by my graduate students for an ASPLOS paper we did for Morpheus 1. But the idea is still the same. These are the grad students that worked on this. They did a fantastic job building Morpheus 1. But this will give you a sense of how Morpheus protects systems. Let's just take a moment to watch this.
In a world where software vulnerabilities are rampant and unsafe languages like C are exceedingly common, attackers are gaining more power by the second. To synthesize an exploit, attackers need access to an asset, such as pointer values. Defenses randomize these values to make it harder for attackers. However, hackers have found help around these measures. But there's hope. Because there's Morpheus. To stop attackers from de-randomizing assets, Morpheus changes it from under them in a process called churn. Morpheus is a secure architecture targeted at stopping advanced control flow attacks, such as ROP. We leverage hardware in RISC-V to provide 2 layers of defenses, displacing memory into a superimposed address space, and encrypting code and pointers. These defenses, combined with churn, significantly hinder exploits. With hardware support, Morpheus can churn sensitive assets every 50 milliseconds with less than 1% slowdowns. With information changing so quickly, attackers are left with a system that is extremely difficult to penetrate and must resort to advanced probing. Because of churn, this challenge becomes a race against a short clock, a race that is nearly impossible to win.
So let's take a look at that process of encryption and churn that is in Morpheus 2. So Morpheus 2 attack detectors discern normal code from malicious code via recognition of what are called undefined semantics. Undefined semantics are the exercising of program operations which are not well defined either in the instruction set or in the programming language or in the underlying microarchitecture. These happen all the time, but they're rare in normal programs and they are prevalent. They are the tools, they are the currency by which security attacks happen. Let me show you an example. This code over here is a very simple security attack, right? We got this program main, which calls this function vulnerable, which has this too small buffer on the stack. When it copies this string onto the stack, it overwrites the return address of vulnerable, which leads to vulnerable not returning to main, but instead calling target because the address of target is embedded in this string. And you'll see there's quite a few undefined semantics in this thing. First of all, going off the end of the array is an undefined semantic. If we can detect that, we've identified that the program is using an undefined semantic. Second, the use of a string value as a pointer is a forgery of a pointer. And that's an undefined semantic because the pointers are only defined by taking the address of something. And then finally, the manipulation of the internal part of the stack frame, which contains the return address by a program other than a call or return, is an undefined semantic. That is simply not defined in the normal ABI for any kind of software. So we've executed 3 undefined semantics. So to stop the attack, what Morpheus is going to do is it's going to encrypt the undefined program semantics. It's going to encrypt pointers. It's going to encrypt the address space representation. It's going to encrypt the code. And then Occasionally, it's going to re-encrypt them because attackers will try to discover what the current state of that encryption is. So through side channels. Churning undefined assets breaks malicious attacks. I can't find the place on the return address stack that I want to manipulate. I don't know how to forge a pointer. I don't know what is past the end of this array. All of a sudden, there's so much uncertainty in the system that attackers are left just trying to discover what's happening. But it does nothing to normal software. It doesn't affect it at all. Why? Because normal software doesn't care about return address locations. It doesn't care about what's past the end of an array. And it doesn't care about forging pointers. Everything a normal software piece of software does is define semantics, and Morpheus doesn't affect the defined semantics. So you break emergent attack, but you don't break normal software. I'll also recognize that we can learn and record what is happening with these attacks, and we can get more efficient at stopping them. I'll show you that in a moment. So let's take a look at how Morpheus breaks an emergent attack and how learning about those attacks can lead to faster resolution of those attacks. So when you commit an attack on a conventional system, typically you got to probe a little bit, what's the current state of memory? Then the attacker synthesizes their attack, launches their attack, and then bingo, pwned, success. Now, if we did 512 bits of encrypted assets, what would happen? The system would be completely unrecognizable to an attacker. But attackers are clever, and they will use what are called side channels to understand the state of the system. Typically, that could take hours to days to do that. But they are going to reverse engineer the state of the system through this extensive probing that'll eventually realize a synthesizable attack. The attack is made, boom, you're in. So just encryption is not very powerful in a system that has side channels. And we don't eliminate the side channels with just encryption. The way we eliminate the side channels is with churn. With churn, as you're probing the system, we're going to re-encrypt everything underneath you. So anything you've discovered about the system at that point, once the re-encryption occurs, it's gone. So you're going to have to come back and you basically have to beat the clock on the churn. So if we churn every 50 milliseconds, then you're going to probe. Here comes a churn. Now I got to rechurn again. I didn't get the information I want. And unless you're lucky enough to discover the information you want in that 50 milliseconds, you're never gonna penetrate that. And that's really what it comes down to with Morpheus. Are you lucky enough to guess what you need to guess in that 50 milliseconds? And it can take a long time to do that. Months, years. There's a significant amount of entropy there. If we learn the nature of an attack, what were the things that were engaged for this particular attack, even if we've never seen it before? We can actually engage the defenses in a more efficient manner, and we can even cut down that window to just a few milliseconds, which is really exciting. So there's actually a learning potential here. We didn't go to do learning in Morpheus 2, but it's something we could eventually do in this world. So let's take a look at Morpheus 2, and let's see how we extended a RISC-V Rocket Core microarchitecture to support these encryption and churn semantics on pointers and code. So first thing we did is we encrypted the code. Where did we encrypt the code? Everywhere. In the memory system, in the caches, in the front end. Everywhere the code is encrypted. Why? Because attackers will steal it if we don't encrypt it everywhere. I'll show you in the pipeline on the next slide, where we just decrypt it right before decode. And that's a real powerful technique because it's encrypted everywhere. The second thing is we encrypted code pointers, and we physically isolated the keys that were used to encrypt those code pointers into the pipeline. And the pointers are always encrypted. Where are they encrypted? They're encrypted in the memory system. They're encrypted on the disk in the swap. They're encrypted in the binary when it comes into the system. They're encrypted in the registers when you do, they're encrypted on the stack. They're encrypted everywhere. They're only decrypted in the pipeline. And so what you do is you get an extra set of instructions for dealing with encrypted code pointers. So there's the ability to, do arithmetic on code pointers using, both encrypted and non-encrypted operands, which produces an encrypted result. You have the ability to do relational operations. Are these two pointers the same? Where both pointers are encrypted, that produces a decrypted result, bit of a side channel there. So we're going to want our churn engaging on a regular basis. And then we can also take a encrypted pointer and we can use it on a special jump instruction to dereference it and get to its destination. Another really unique thing about Morpheus II is there is no tagging. What is tagging? If you build a system with any kind of secure analyses or secure data types inside of it, there's sort of this desire to tag it. So, is this an encrypted pointer or is this not an encrypted pointer? The challenge with that is tagging affects all parts of the system, from the pipeline to the caches to the memory controller to the DRAM, et cetera, et cetera. You need places to store tags. You need to be able to interpret and bring tags where you need them. Huge mess, huge mess. The day we discovered that we didn't have to tag stuff was a beautiful day. So, and how do you not tag stuff? All pointers are encrypted, every one. There's no pointers that are not encrypted. So you don't have to decide if it's tagged or not, because you don't have to decide if it's encrypted or not, because it is encrypted, because it's a pointer. So it's a beautiful thing. And then, these tests, I just want to say, they're leaky. There's information that leaks out of these tests. So there's a lot of side channels in the system. So that's why we want to engage churn on a regular basis. This is a Morpheus II microarchitecture made by Austin and Taranesh. So I want to give them some credit. They worked hard on this design. And basically what happens is, first a little bit of context. This particular microarchitecture is built to stop a particular kind of attack called remote code execution. What is that? That's an attack where someone off the system is trying to inject their code onto your system, either through what's called code injection or control flow attacks, or ROP, return-oriented programming, or COOP, or all the variety. It's a really well-developed area of security attacks because it's a primary means how people attack systems. You might have heard of the Microsoft Exchange server attacks that were going on all last summer that were very difficult to stop. That's an RCE attack, for example. All right, so this stops RCE attacks. The way it does that is by encrypting all of the code. Code's encrypted in the disk and the caches, and it gets decrypted right out of the fetch stage. So as you come out of the fetch stage, we decrypt the code. It's kind of snuck into the front end of the pipeline, and then you get one stage of decrypted instruction in the decode, and then it gets, spews out cometh the control signals, instruction is gone. So there's really no place to steal a decrypted instruction in the system unless you can side channel that fetch stage. That's tough. I'm not sure how to do that. And then the code pointers are stored encrypted in the data caches, in the code, everywhere. And when there is an indirect jump in the form of a return or in the form of a jump through a register, we engage an additional cycle on those instructions to decrypt those pointers. So as you do a return, you grab the pointer out of the register, and then you engage the decryptors, and then that goes into the PC. Okay. So always encrypted code, always encrypted code pointer. So there's literally just these wires to grab that value. So that's a tough side channel task, but it does affect how it addresses memory. There's side channels in there. So we're going to continually re-engage the churn. And look at the kind of things you can stop here: code injection, rooting, ROP analysis by encrypting the code. By encrypting code pointers, stops buffer overflow, return-oriented programming, return to libc, COOP attacks. Encrypting the data caches stops disclosures, things like foreshadow. Encrypting the RAM and disk stops jailbreaks, cold boot attacks. Just such a power to have everything encrypted all the time. And as a bonus, you don't need tags, which are going to just puke all over your pipeline and make your design a total mess. So really love the idea of just encrypt it all. So let's take a look at some performance analysis, area analysis, power analysis, and security analysis at the end here. So Morpheus design overheads, pretty low. In terms of the design changes, we added 369 lines of chisel code, and that included our crypto engine. We deployed as part of the DARPA SITH program in a Xilinx UltraScale Plus FPGA. our cipher was a 12-round Simon cipher. If you've never had a chance to look at Simon, I highly recommend it. This is a cipher that was invented by the NSA. It's Simon and Spec. They're twins. Spec is for software, Simon's for hardware. And what you learn is when you see a cipher that was designed for hardware, you see a cipher that can run really, really fast. In one cycle on this machine, we can get 12 rounds, which isn't the full strength of Simon, but it is a strong cipher. It's not just like XORing a key over to something. You've got to do some serious reverse engineering and cryptanalysis of that data to recover that data with 12 rounds of Simon cipher, and fits in one cycle. Worked really great. Because we only affect indirect jumps and a little bit of additional front end, our performance overheads were less than 1%. There's really not a case. The better your branch predictor is, the less your performance overhead is going to be. Power overhead is very small. We don't increase the size of any data objects. We put a little bit of crypto in the pipeline, just really minimal impact on power and minimal impact on area, which is basically just our crypto engines. And when we ran things like network apps, you couldn't even feel it. Is this the original or is it the safe version of the pipe? You can't tell. It's a really, really low overhead. And this is really a pointed design specifically at stopping runtime remote code execution, but very efficient as a result. And then being part of the DARPA SIF program, we had the really fantastic opportunity to get involved at the tail end of that program in what was called the DARPA FET program. So DARPA FET was commercial red testing of our systems. So as part of that, we had to stand up our design into an AWS F1 FPGA. And then we built a challenge application. We had 535 attackers, which worked for the company Synac, which is a crowdsourced red teaming event. So these are people from all over the world, skilled attackers who have got a reputation with that company, trying to penetrate our system. And they worked for sizable bug bounties. We learned that the bounties were up to $50,000 at some point. And on the system, it was running a mock medical database. We only had to change 3 lines of code for Morpheus to get all this stuff running on there. And so we had basically a website with a REST API on top of a database, and then running on top of real-time operating system. And people could make queries to that database, and their mission was to do code injection, any kind of control flow or remote code injection on that machine. And along with that, they knew what vulnerabilities there were in that system. So the DARPA SIF program was really focused on stopping vulnerable software. So as part of the red teaming, the attackers knew where there were vulnerabilities in the code. So their job was to try to defeat the defenses for these known vulnerabilities. And we were the second most engaged target out of 7 that were in the program. And we would have been the most engaged had they let the program go a little bit longer, because they threw some big bounties on us at the end. And we were penetrated 0 times. 535 attackers over 3 months, 0 penetrations. I had the opportunity a few months ago to meet a grizzly pen tester from the industry, and I asked him, is this an interesting result? And he'd never heard of anything like that. So the idea that you go 3 months with 500 pen testers beaten on your system, 0 vulnerabilities with known penetrations, means there's something here. This system is hard to attack. It's very hard to attack. Is it unhackable? Well, the press says yes. I don't say yes, because it is as yet unhackable, but it's probably hackable in some form. Which really got us thinking. This is really powerful security. What can we do beyond this? I knew when we went into FET we'd do pretty well, because I hired this guy, Shibo Chen, one of the smartest Michigan undergrads I ever worked with. He's now my PhD student. The guy is just amazing. And I had him hacking this system for a year before anybody else had a chance to get on. And it's hard to hack this system because it is almost impossible to forge a pointer. It's almost impossible to forge code. It is really hard to understand where stuff is in the address space because the pointers are all encrypted. You can't do any kind of remote pointer arithmetic because that's all cryptographically hard. It's really tough. And churning on the system really puts a time limit on how long you have to probe that system. So if you want to attack a Morpheus system, you got to be fast, and you're going to do an attack that you've that's really bespoke. It's unique. With 504 bits of entropy on the system you're dealing with right now, it's unique in time and space across all Morpheus systems forever. So, we really want to lean into this idea of uncertainty, into this idea of durable security defenses. And the things that were really durable about Morpheus was cryptography. Cryptography is a beautiful thing, right? It's, nobody's busting AES tomorrow. If they did, it would be world-renowned news, right? It's been around for 35 years, nobody's broken it. That's durability. Now, someone's going to hack into any piece of software you care about in the next few weeks, but crypto, that's durable. So we really got to lean into that particular case. And physical isolation, we kept the keys of Morpheus in their own little register, no software access. The idea of physically isolating things that we want to protect is really enticing. And so that's what we're doing in my startup, Attad Labs. We are developing a next generation technology to commercialize what we learned on the Morpheus II project. We're developing a CPU, we call it the SPU, the secret processing unit, that provides highly secure secret processing. Secret processing is just a subslice of the program, which is computation that no one can see under any circumstance, whether the software is penetrated or whether you have highly sophisticated side channel attacks. And this form of computation is based on cryptography, physical isolation, which are very durable defenses. And we're deploying it into the Microsoft Azure and AWS clouds. I'd be glad to tell you more about it. Feel free to contact me if you'd like to learn more. It's been a pleasure to present. Thank you so much for the opportunity. And I will be sticking around to answer questions until they're all gone. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.